Welcome back to Buford Pusser, the other story. And joining me today is Arnie Hardy, and we are here to talk about the wounds that Buford endured while he was sheriff. Arnie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. You know, Buford became a legend, and part of that is that he was shot 8 times, stabbed 7 times, but not everybody knows the real story behind all that. And so that's what we'd like to clear up a little bit. Most of what people know is either the movie version from Walking Tall, which is really fabricated, it's just based loosely on actual events, or the legend version that is told by in books or folks from the museum, just whatever. So, what we want to do is really kind of straighten this out. First thing I'd like to hit on is again that the real story is very different from what most people know. One being that there was almost a total lack of witnesses to any of these incidents. So, it's on the surface, it's hard to know if Buford was telling the truth about being shot 8 times and stabbed 7 times by people unknown to him. Do you have any comments there, Arnie?
Uh, not only did he have any witnesses, there's not a lot of evidence to what he was actually saying actually happened. I mean, we were talking about his wounds. His wounds don't match up to what he's saying, and the photographs that we have show no wounds that he said actually happened to him.
Well, let's back up just 1 second and go back to the first claim that he made about being cut up, robbed, left out for dead at the Plantation Club, where he claimed he had 192 stitches to close those wounds.
You let them do this to me and get away with it, and you give them the eternal right to do the same damn thing to any one of you. You're out of order, sir, and put on your shirt.
But yet, we want to show some photographs of that incident and or at least of Buford's chest. These were the best one was taken 2 years later when he was getting into professional wrestling, and you see no signs of scars anywhere on him.
When back in the 50s, when you got stitches, I mean, we can't, we didn't get stitched up back in the 50s, but the wounds would have showed up clear as day. They either been red or pink or even white would have showed up. And wrestling is wrestling. If you're a man who's all cut up, they're going to use that to their advantage. They're going to use some kind of gimmick to make some money off that. But
Oh,
there's
sure.
no wounds at all on his photographs.
Right. So, I guess what we're saying here is that Buford fabricated that first incident where he went to the Plantation Club and claimed he was beaten, cut up, and robbed. There's no medical records that support it. There's no photographs that support it. There's no police reports, doctors' reports, anything that support that story. So then you move on to the next incident that happened when he claimed that he was stabbed several times in the chest by a hitchhiker that he was just going to give a lift to and take him into jail and give him a place to sleep for a night and give him a meal. But yet, he did go to the hospital. He did have some minor wounds, but nothing serious at all. And it's kind of amazing that you could get stabbed in the chest. I think he said 5 times, but you spend one night in the hospital and you're out and no scars to show for it.
Yeah, I think if you get stabbed 5 times in the chest, you're going to be in the hospital a little more than a day. And I don't think he's going to be staying in McNairy County Hospital. They're probably going to take him to Memphis because a knife wound to the chest is going to cause a lot of internal damage.
Well, the thing that amazes me about that, and probably you as well, both of us having been in law enforcement, is the fact that he couldn't identify his attacker. He didn't get ID on the guy. He didn't have a good description. So we know nothing about this alleged person. All we have is Buford's story that it happened.
Yeah, there's no great manhunt that I was aware of trying to locate this person after it happened. I'm
No.
thinking if you stab the county sheriff and sends him to the hospital, I think a lot of people are out looking for that person who did the stabbing.
Yeah. Now, the only time that I have found that there was a witness to any of these events was when he went to a house fire uh, where there had been a loss of life. Ward Moore, the county coroner, was there. And Ward did say that Buford spotted a car that he felt like might be hauling moonshine. And so he went up to the car to talk to the driver. And the driver started to take off. Buford got on the hood of the car. Now, Ward Moore said that was true, but he said Buford didn't get stabbed in the arms while he was hanging onto the hood like he claimed. And just a few days later, he was in Selmer and he heard Ben Pusser, Buford's uncle, telling the story to some people. And he asked him, Ben, why are you telling that story? It's not true. And he said, well, it helps him get more votes at election time. So you've got one witness that could not verify Buford's story about being stabbed then.
A little fabrication on Ben's part, but yeah, that's the only witness to my knowledge to any of his injuries, job related, that he had in any of his cases.
Yeah. Now, when you go on to the gunshot wounds, and the one that just really kicked off his legend as being somewhat of a hero initially was when he went down to the Shamrock, he and two deputies, and they were going to arrest Louise Hathcock, allegedly for stealing a purse. And Buford was interviewing her, and she, according to him, said, well, let's go back in my private living quarters and we can discuss this, and I'll tell you what's going on at the state line. They went into her private living quarters, and neither of the deputies accompanied him in there, which is kind of a strange ordeal. But Jim Moffitt was in the hallway, and then you had two individuals, one I can name, and that was Howard Carroll. And according to Howard and one other person, they said that they heard Louise begging for her life while she was in the motel room. They heard three shots initially, and they assumed it was from his gun because he was using a 41 Magnum. And then a little bit later, they heard a single pop from her gun, and the bullet allegedly missed Buford, went through a window, lodged itself in an awning post outside. And of course, that was ruled a justifiable homicide. But the problem was when they did an autopsy, they found out that the first two shots, according to Buford's own statement, the first shot was to her shoulder, and he said it nipped her in the shoulder. And then he said the other one was to the torso. But what he forgot to tell us was that those shots were to her back. And the third shot was to her head as she lay on the floor.
Yeah, the autopsy showed that his story. He's shooting her, he's spinning her around. I mean, she allegedly shot first, missed 6'6", 250-pound man, and she's standing only feet from him. She misses him. He pulls the gun out and shoots him, obviously, or tries to shoot him, according to that. But again, no witnesses. And you know for a fact that Sheriff James Opere was on a grand jury, and the autopsy never made it to the grand jury.
Correct. And better yet, we didn't even know about that autopsy report for probably 30 years.
Barbara Bivens, who knew it existed, couldn't get her hands on it. Once she finally got her hands onto it, it was a whole different story on Buford.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Yeah. The autopsy didn't lie. Obviously, Buford was lying. P.D. Plunk was lying because his story is pretty much the same as Buford. So there's two law enforcement officials lying in a shooting death.
Yeah, and the odd part was, I'd mentioned that Jim Moffitt was standing out in the hallway just outside that room. The door was closed because there was some dry cleaning that was hanging on the door, and he couldn't see in, but I'm sure he could hear. But the odd part of it was when I interviewed his son, O'Neill Moffett, O'Neill told me that Jim quit for several days right after that. He came home that evening. O'Neill was on leave from the military, and Jim told his wife and his son, O'Neill, that if anything ever happens to me, you don't need to look any further than BUFORD Pusser. So it makes me wonder what Jim knew that he wouldn't say.
Well, you probably heard what Howard Carroll heard: three loud bangs, so to speak, and then two little bangs would be Louise's gun. But there's a difference between a 41 Magnum and a little 38 stub nose sound wise.
Oh, yeah, that 41 Magnum's going to sound like a cannon compared to the 38 that she allegedly used. Um, you know, and like I say, that really kind of put him on the map. People started giving him credit for closing down the state line, but what they don't realize is that the Shamrock restaurant was in Mississippi, and which was only about 30 feet away from the motel. The Plantation Club, which they called the Lucky Spot in Walking Tall, was also in Mississippi. So, the Plantation Club closed down several months before Buford was ever elected sheriff. So, the Plantation Club, which they called the Lucky Spot in Walking Tall, was also in Mississippi. So, the Plantation Club closed down several months before Buford was ever elected sheriff. So the movie has really had an impact on some people in a way that's not good, because they believe that movie was true, and it certainly wasn't.
And also down on the state line was Hollis Jordan's bar, which Buford didn't close because they were good friends. So
Well,
that bar didn't get closed either.
a little ways on up, you had Junior Smith's Old Hickory Grill, and Buford was said to be a silent partner in that operation. So,
And Shirley Smith told me that herself, that Buford was involved in the ownership of that bar.
yeah. Uh, the next shooting came along in January of 1967. Now, in the movie, they showed that, and the legend version that you'll read in books talks about it. But the part that they don't really explain is that Buford was not seriously wounded. Uh, it was one of those things where he said he had his left arm grazed, and when you see the pictures, you'll see a patch on his left arm. You'll also see a patch on his face, his left cheek, where he was supposedly hit twice. Now, the part that I have a difficult time understanding about that one is why that his lips, his gums, his teeth, his tongue, nothing was injured, just a hole in his cheek. And it was almost like a miracle that the two shots that he said he got there didn't hit something other than this fleshy part of his face.
I would, if someone would shoot me in the face, I think I'm moving so that I'm not moving. I'm not staying in the same spot so they can shoot me again in the same spot.
Yeah.
I don't know how, I mean, I'm sure he was able to move, but I never bought that story. I mean, I don't know what happened there, obviously, but I never bought that he got shot through the mouth, exited out through the mouth in the same spot. I don't think that's even physically possible for that to happen.
Well, and I found newspaper articles telling about how that although he was at the hospital, he was actually commanding the search party to go after Towhead White. Now, he couldn't identify the people who were involved in that, but for some reason he was focused on getting Towhead White back in prison. Towhead had walked off from a minimum security prison several days before, one that was located in Montgomery, Alabama. And Buford, I think Towhead was the one man that Buford was actually afraid of.
Yeah, Tommy Bivens and Barb Bivens were good friends with Towhead and Buford. I mean, Tommy was a friend of Buford. Barbara wasn't, but Barbara told me a story prior to the shooting in '67 where Pusser was making a big deal about nobody going after Towhead. Wasn't a big deal to the federal government to pick him up. They'd eventually pick him up, and he was going to make sure the heat was on him somehow. And so he was going to come up with something. He didn't tell Tommy and Barbara what it was, but a couple of days later, he's shot in this little ambush in '67. So
Yeah.
this is his little plan, I guess.
Well, Towhead, I guess, was smart enough to know that every law enforcement officer would be after him and that they probably wouldn't give him a chance. So he turned himself back in and went to prison again. Did it on his terms. Be sure and subscribe and hit that bell so that you'll get notifications of new videos when they're released. Well, then we roll around to the 1967 ambush where Pauline was killed. And I've always wondered about that story since I got involved in researching it because the story didn't make any sense to me that he was ambushed the way he was. I mean, let's face it, a lot of people don't know that Buford and Pauline were having marital problems, that they had been separated. Pauline had been living in a motel in Savannah, and that was information I got from LaVon Plunk, Deputy Petey Plunk's wife, as they were best friends. And she had taken Pauline home that night, and it was one of those situations where LaVon was going to wait and, take Pauline and the kids away from the Pusser home. But she was afraid of Buford, so she parked down the street a little ways because if Buford came home, she didn't want to be there. She had turned down Pauline's invitation to come inside and wait. Well, LaVon said, I got down the street, I parked. It wasn't long before Buford passed by. He got out of his car and went in the house, and shortly thereafter, I heard a single gunshot. She said she didn't know what to do. Uh, she knew that there wasn't any way that she could intercede at that point. She didn't even know who she could contact because Petey was one of Buford's most trusted deputies. And LaVon didn't want to get him in trouble and put him in a spot where he'd be lying for Buford in case something happened. She didn't know who she could trust. And so while she's trying to figure out what she's going to do, Petey called her and said, well, Pauline just got killed in an ambush on New Hope Road that was meant for Buford.
I know you've heard me say this before. Just to back that story up a little bit, I was introduced to Diane, Buford's stepdaughter, Pauline's daughter, while she's working at the Pusser restaurant, and introduced her to her. And I ran into her in the hallway later on in the night, and she was asking me some questions. And she said, "I got a story for you." And she told me the night her mom got killed, she was in the bedroom, and Buford showed up, and they start arguing, and they're arguing, and then she heard a pop. I didn't ask her any questions about the pop. She just said she heard a pop. Then it was quiet in the house. And then he walked out the front door, and he was carrying Pauline to the car, put her in the front seat, and she's looking out the window during all this. And he starts walking back to the house. She thinks he's coming back in for her, so she crawls under the bed, but he doesn't come back in the house, and then she hears a car and drive away. I mean, I didn't ask her any questions. She just told me that, and this is back in the early 2000s, so this a lot of the information wasn't quite out there yet, but I was having supper with Duana, so I wasn't going to go back and tell Duana, hey, Diane just told me this. What do you think? So I had to keep to myself that for a couple of years, or quite a few years. I didn't really have anybody to tell that to, but I thought that was quite interesting information that she told me.
Well, I first heard the story from Olin Sonny Davis. And at the time, he had been a police officer in Jackson, there where Diane was going to school. And with him being originally from Selmer and Diane being from Selmer, uh, or Adamsville, they knew each other. And so they had a conversation about it one day. And, he added a little bit to the story, as did Levon, that, you know, uh, when Buford walked back to the house, that's when you say Diane thought he was coming back to do something with her. Uh, that he got about halfway to the house, picked up uh, Pauline's shoes that had fallen off of her feet and placed them in the front floorboard on the passenger side of the vehicle. And, here's a picture showing the shoes sitting there, and they do look like they've been placed there rather than just kicked off by a lady that was going for a ride that morning.
Yeah, there's no witnesses to the shooting, but there's a lot of witnesses that were kind of at the house what Buford wasn't aware of. So obviously he wasn't aware of that going on around his house.
Well, about the same time, allegedly, Ward Moore got a call from Carl. And Carl Pusser, Buford's dad, told him, "You need to get over to the house. Buford and Pauline are in a fight. They're about to kill each other." And he said by the time he got over there, both of them were gone. And he did see a, a droplet of blood on the carpet and didn't know what to make of it. There wasn't anything he could do. So all he could do was leave. And it kind of took him by surprise just a few hours later when he heard about the ambush on New Hope Road and Pauline being killed. And here again, who does he tell? I think he felt that it was going to be covered up, very possibly. So I don't know.
You got three different people with three different views of this. That those three people don't know the other three people know all this information.
Right.
They have no reason to lie because their stories
Yeah.
are the same, but they're telling the same story, but they don't know each other knows the story.
They didn't know at the time that each of them had witnessed something about this. So that is kind of strange. But then what gets you is there's missing time between the time they left the house and the time that they got down on New Hope Road. And I bring that up because, Buford took this convoluted system of back roads to get down to New Hope Road. And according to him, he was responding to a disturbance call at Hollis Jordan's place on Highway 45. Now, you and I have both gone through this several times. And if it had been you, what route would you have taken?
The fastest route, probably 64 to 45.
Yeah. But yet he took this convoluted system of back roads, almost no housing around. He gets to the church, and his story was that a car fell in behind him. He didn't know it was there because they approached him without headlights. It's 4:45 in the morning. As they got to the little bridge there, about 7/10 of a mile down the road from the church, the car turned on its lights. A couple of shots were fired. One hit Pauline in the head. She was wounded, according to him. She was alive. And there we have questions about how would an ambush party know that he would take that route instead of 64 and 45?
Yeah, and also we've tried to drive that several times, and our speeds and our distance we covered never seemed to match up with his story. But
we could not reconstruct it the way that he claimed that it happened.
Yeah, you're right. How does this ambush party know that he's going to be driving down that way?
Yeah.
And why would he even be waiting for him? They could have shot when he came out of his house. They could have got him whenever they wanted to get him. But why
Absolutely.
wait? He's on New Hope Road.
There were so many ways that they could have got to Buford a lot differently and a lot easier. But then, he drives 2 miles further on down the road. He gets to Davis Yancey and New Hope Roads. He said he stopped to check on Pauline, and that as he was about to get out of the car, he had 1 foot on the ground, 1 foot still inside the car, and said they roared up and was on him again. Now, I've always questioned why he didn't know that they were behind him, because after you've lost your element of surprise at the first ambush sites, Why would you turn your headlights off again? That makes no sense. He should have been able to see them behind him for that full 2 miles, or at least see some light illuminating the area around the car as it came around curves, whatever. But, for some reason he thought he had lost it. And there's no roads, or there weren't any at that time, for them to pull off on.
Yeah. I don't
Well,
know how he got away from them, because if they're right on top of him already, if he pulls away, they're still with him.
yeah,
He's not getting away from them.
absolutely. And there's no signs that they traded paint anywhere when they allegedly pulled up alongside him at the first ambush. Uh, but the part that gets me is he claimed that uh, they pulled up alongside him a second time there at the second ambush site. Uh, Shots were fired. He said he got hit by one of the first rounds and he went down to the floorboard, saying it probably saved his life. And he said he was unconscious for a while. When he came to, he reached over, grabbed the steering wheel, pulled himself back up behind the steering wheel in the driver's seat, and he saw that Pauline was dead. And he looked to his left and saw the car, the ambush vehicle, was still sitting there with the gun hanging out the window. And he said he reached out and grabbed the barrel of the gun. Now, to me, why would assassins sit there and wait to see if he was going to sit back up? You would think anybody worth their salt would have just stepped out of the car and made sure that they had finished their business there. And
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks on that story. First, Pauline was in his lap when she got shot. Did he lift her back up to check on her, and they came and he looked at him and they shot him in the face? I mean, where did she go when he got shot? I mean, obviously she was laying on the door, or her head was laying on the door, but it shows a lot of blood, but that's really not a lot of blood for a head.
There is a void there on the door where her head rested. And when you look at it, you don't see any signs of blood spatter, anything like that, because it goes around that void and trails down. And it's not a great amount of blood.
It looks like a lot, but it's going down to make it look like it's a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Buford said he nor Pauline ever got out of the vehicle, but yet there's blood spatter all over the outside of the car. How did that happen?
Yeah, where's all the blood matter, or the brain matter, and the blood all over the inside of the car if she's getting shot in the head?
I don't know.
According to
I've never seen pictures that detail the inside of the car the way I would like to see them.
Even on the windshield, there's no blood on the windshield on the inside of the car, which you can see.
No, not like you would expect when somebody was shot in the head a second time and the top of her head blown off. I guess there's a lot of things that trouble me about that. The wound to his chin, I mean, he's sitting close enough to reach out there and grab the barrel of the rifle. And the best they could do is shoot him in the chin after firing 17 shots. That doesn't make sense to me.
I had the opportunity I discussed this with you earlier. I had the opportunity to sit and talk to our assistant coroner today, and I was showing her some of these pictures because she's in that field. I'm not a medical field by any means. And she was explaining to me that looks like a small caliber wound. It wasn't done by an M1, because that would blew his face all the way off. And the scarring, the sewing or whatever, the stitches are an up and down on his face.
Yeah.
And she's saying when they sewed him up, they were going with the angle where the bullet went, so the gap is smaller. They sew it back together. So she's saying the bullet came either from the top of him or from the bottom of him, not from straight on.
I've got a picture of that I'll put up here. The thing is, the movie had everybody believing that Buford's jaw was blown away. Books will say that his chin was hanging down to his chest. And I do have one of the original pictures that a lady named Patsy Horton, her friend, or her husband, Roger, was a good friend of Buford's, and he bought some photos from Petey Plunk of Buford's face. They're a little too gory to put on here, but I do have them on my Facebook page, Buford Pusser, the other story. And you can see that wound if you want to go over there and see something a little bit graphic. But it's not from a rifle like you would think with like an M1 or anything like that. There just wasn't that kind of damage. And
But the photo behind you shows a lot of Buford. His jaw wasn't shot off because it's still on his face. His teeth are
yeah,
still intact. His teeth are still intact. You know, he's saying I lost some teeth, and so his teeth are all there. His jaw is still there. His tongue there. His lips. So yeah,
so
it's his injury. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't a bad injury, but it wasn't as bad as it was portrayed in the movie or in Buford's eyes.
well, he was back to work 18 days later. And for an injury like that, you would think it would be longer if it was as bad as he claimed. Plus, another thing that we need to get to is they said he had 16 surgeries. However, most of those were to repair an orbital eye socket that he crushed when he was in an auto accident. He said he went to sleep at the wheel while he was driving home. And that was on October 4th of 1969. And you'll see in these pictures that are taken early on and some that were taken after 1969, the early on ones, after he was ambushed and had his chin shot away, you don't see any damage up here. You don't see that until the photos from 1969, and that was late 1969.
But even in the 70s, he was still having operations on that. You can see after he's sheriff, they're still operating on and trying to get that
Yeah,
all back to normal. But there's nothing going on down in his chin. That's all over with.
yeah.
You know, they're still operating up around his eye.
So I guess what we are trying to say here is that, of course, he didn't tell the real story about his wounds and the number of operations he had to restore his jaw. That was highly embellished. Now we're going to run out of time here, so we might hit the Russell Hamilton shooting real quick. That was in 1968 on Christmas Day. Do you want to tell about the wounds that he had?
It was a graze in his abdomen, and that was about it. Uh, Again, he's a big man, 6'6", 250 or whatever, and Hamilton allegedly came up out of the couch and shot at Buford and grazed him, and they shot him again and hit his handle on his gun, and Buford returned fire and hit him right between the eyes with one shot.
Yeah, Hamilton also hit the door facing.
So Hamilton got all three shots and didn't really hit Buford at all, really, when you look at it.
Just a graze, and he didn't even go to the doctor for that one.
Again, no witnesses.
Yeah, amazing. So, folks, there you have it. The real story about all of Buford's wounds. It really makes you extremely suspicious when you think about it. You analyze all that, you look at the photos, you listen to his stories, and they just don't match up.
Yeah, photos don't lie. I mean, back then you couldn't doctor a photo if you tried. I mean, they are what they are. They're black and white
Yeah.
photos, and they don't lie.
Well, Arnie, we're going to be running out of time. I would like to remind everybody that the meet and greet and the free tour of the Buford related sites over in McNairy County is going to take place on Saturday, the 24th. We're going to meet at the Ag Center there at the fairgrounds at about 8:30. We'll leave there at 10, and we'll go to the crash site where he was killed, the museum. We'll take the route that he drove with Pauline that morning of the ambush. We'll stop at the Methodist Church where the ambush party was alleged to have been waiting. We'll hit both of the ambush sites. All of these will stop for photos. We'll move on down to the state line where you can see where all these clubs were, and you'll understand that Buford really only had the Shamrock Motel and the White Iris immediately there at the state line that he had jurisdiction over. And then we'll drive on down. We'll see where Sheriff Dickey was killed. We'll see where Hollis Jordan's place was, which is where that they were headed that morning. And then we'll going to drive by the Old Hickory Grill, and where it's at, it's no longer there. We're going to tour by Pearl Wade's residence that was there at the time. Then we're going to go by Willie B's, back up by Alan McCoy's store, which is where Buford and Pauline were found after the ambush. We'll drive by the location where the gun exchange took place that was witnessed by Dennis Hathcock and Johnny Harrison. And then we'll go on to the jail where we'll see the offices that the county has set up as Buford's offices, but yet we know that his actual office was down the hall a ways, but it's kind of neat to see. Then we'll go on up to the jail and we'll take a tour of it, get your pictures behind bars if you want. Some interesting stuff like that. We'll talk a little bit about how Charlie Brown hanged himself allegedly there in the jail while Carl Pusser was the jailer. How Paul David English escaped from the jail. And then after that, we'll go down to the courtroom for anybody that has questions. We'll do a little question and answer session, take a break. And then for those who wish, we're going to have a restaurant that will announce the morning of the meet and greet and tell everybody where we're going to meet for dinner that evening. So we will have refreshments, coffee, donuts, soft drinks, water there at the meet and greet. I would advise everybody to bring a lunch with you because it's going to be a long day and there's not anything along the way where we can stop for lunch that would be able to handle a crowd that of the size that we'll probably have again. Then I might also mention the museum charges $10 admission for adults. 7 to 17 years of age is $3, and 6 and under is free. So like to support the museum when we go through. But that being said, I don't have anything else for today. Do you, Arnie?
No, did a nice job of getting the name, Mike. Keep up the good work.
Well, we'll keep trying. Well, just to remember, as I always say,